All right, well, there he is. Let's jump right in it.
Let's jump right in it.
Welcome to Brothers
Show
Having
G
Breakfast.
Sheep, what up?
What up? Oh, he on the bike. Okay.
Yeah, he on the workout bike.
So, everybody want to introduce themselves?
Dude, Addison's down.
That part.
All right, what's up, everybody? It's the Diamond Crook coming through. You know what I'm saying? Trying to do it big with the squad. You know what I mean? Like, we've been here, we've been there, we've been everywhere.
Man, he said he only had a couple of minutes. All right. Go ahead, Teddy.
Yeah, hey, what's happening, man? It's your boy Dutch, man, live on location in the middle of the road. Let's get it.
So, we can rebuild it.
B. Jones, Show God 23.
And we got a special guest in the anonymous mask.
Yes, sir.
He is the Zoom user.
So let's jump in. Addison said he'll be bringing the topic to the table today. I know I missed the last one. It was at night.
The last one doesn't even exist on here yet. It's like it never happened.
So what's the topic or the subject at hand?
Because to some degree, we have to catch the two who missed the last one, have to catch them up.
Okay. Go ahead. You want to go? Let's say you want to.
Listen, what was the subject? What was the subject answer that I sent to your question about how to describe what we would discuss? You remember that? You have that near? Hello?
Addison.
Hey, fellas, I'm about to jump off, man. I'm driving, so I'm going to get at y'all later.
All right, then.
All right, that works.
Be careful.
I love y'all. Y'all be careful. Be safe.
All right.
Addison, what the hell?
I think you was asking us what do we identify as?
No, that wasn't the question. The question is, or the topic is skin color, aka race, and why Negroes are still
skin
having,
color.
yeah, why
Mythological
Negroes
skin
are still
color
having,
identity complexes and their origins and consequences, and why Negroes are having the same conversations today they had in 1921.
there it is.
Yeah, I had to go find a text message.
So you wanna
So we're
wanna
gonna start at the beginning.
Okay.
We're gonna start at the beginning, but I'm gonna do a little bit of a capsule version because Addison, two of y'all have already heard it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do a little bit of a capsule version. So in 1676, there was this event called Bacon's Rebellion in the colony of Virginia. Okay. And the only reason Bacon's Rebellion is significant is because it was the first sort of organized, what we would think of as armed rebellion in the New World. But that wasn't nearly as significant as the repercussions of the event. So what happened basically was Virginia was in the early stages of being a colony, wasn't really all that prosperous at that point, and wasn't all that what we would think of as settled or developed. So you had a bunch of people, bunch of settlers out on the frontier, which to some degree is what is now Western Virginia and West Virginia. And they were being harassed by the Indians so much that they kept asking the governor of Virginia for help. And he wasn't all that concerned and didn't pay attention.
The
So,
Indians.
gentleman, the last name Bacon, decided he was going to teach the governor a lesson. And so they basically marched on and burned down, I think it was Jamestown or Williamsburg, to the ground, which was where the governor lived. And that wasn't really as significant. Sorry about that. That wasn't really as significant as what the British did after Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion ended up not really amounting to anything in and of itself. But because the rebellion featured the non-wealthy members of the Virginia colony of all shades. But here's the important thing to remember. At the time of the rebellion, there was no such consideration as shades of skin.
Okay.
But because of the potential threat, the landowners, the British, London, the king, etc., realized that they needed to do something to make sure this never happened again. So it took them about 15 years to figure out what to do. And in 1691, we see the first written use of the terms white, mulatto, and negro. First time ever used. All right. And it was used to divide. Whites can't do this with blacks or mulattoes, etc., etc. So basically, what the British did is they just figured out a new form of their class divisions, which they had used, they and the rest of the Europeans had used so effectively in Europe for centuries, right? But it didn't work so well in the New World because you didn't have direct control over people the way you did in European cities and countrysides. The New World was a wilderness, especially America. Interestingly, as a side point, America was originally referred to by the British as the wasteland for the waste people. This is the origin of the term white trash or trash. And there is a 400-year etymology and history of the use of that word and the concepts that are derived from it, which date back to the 1500s. Anyway, that's sort of a side point. The main point, though, is that skin color became, number one, a thing. That is to say, a reality, right, in a legal sense, not just something you observe, casually observing people. Number two, this then, because it was used legally to divide people, it created the foundation for two very important things: the concept and the identities of white and so-called black, or as they used at the time, and until recently, quite frankly, negro, which obviously is Spanish for black.
Okay.
The significance of this is that those two words became identities before there was the thought of such a thing as an American identity. So for us, whose ancestors, to one degree or another, were here either during those years or sometime in the following, I don't know, 100 years or so. This has shaped everything we have been taught consciously, subconsciously about ourselves and others since then. So what's the crux of it? And this is the really important part of it. Because it was created by men who then called themselves white and who were landowners, they set the stage and the framework for the entire discussion, for the entire topic. And this continues
people
to
with
this
power.
day. Well,
So
it
it's
was
basically people with power got to define who everybody was.
Exactly.
So if they could figure out how to keep people who didn't have power from collecting and gathering power.
There you go.
So
now, go ahead.
Oh, so you had asked, what do you identify as? So
I
what?
didn't ask that actually.
Well,
but go ahead.
Well, the question was more about the irrational identity that was forged in that time. I think that's what he's explaining.
Well, I'm getting to that. We have to understand the origins of it to understand why it's irrational. Right?
Okay.
So when you understand that it is the entirety of what we think of as an identity is in fact a mythology. It was an invention. It was a fabrication. We can then begin to understand the following centuries of behavior and thought. Because if the foundation of your identity is a lie, then you have to continue lying to justify that identity. And when people start to believe lies, you're in a very delicate situation. Right? Now, depending on which side of the equation, you may or may not realize how delicate your situation is. Your existential foundation, you may think is solid, or you may think is actually quite fragmented and unsubstantial, when the reality is all of it is. But because white continually define the terms of the reality of the identity existential structures that we're dealing with, they were continually able to literally define who we are. And necessarily, as whiteness came into contact with other things that, according to these 1690s definitions, could not be white, they had to be something else, because they couldn't be white and they didn't fit into the category of black. They couldn't be black. So they had to find other words. For example, the paraded around, frequently heard word today of Latino or Hispanic or whatever. Well, I don't know how familiar you guys are with those countries, but all of those countries are ruled and have been ruled by people with very pale skin since the Spanish destroyed those cultures, the Native American cultures there, throughout all the countries that speak Spanish.
I think Barbados just got from underneath the Queen.
Yeah, I saw that. That was kind of interesting. I thought they'd done that.
Then, you got Haiti that did its thing.
Well, Haiti's an interesting situation, actually. It's really quite bizarre, but that's another subject. We can get into that, though. I'm just speaking about the Spanish speakers. So,
right.
So all those countries, if you look at the people who own everything, who are the elected officials, they all have pale skin, right? If we were to see them walking down the streets, we'd call them white. And in fact, that is what they think of themselves as, although they think it's a little more technical with it. They think of it as Spanish, right? You even hear Castro talking about his Galician origins, whatever. But at some point in the 1800s, the Anglos in America decided that anybody south of the border who was Catholic and spoke Spanish was not white. And if you all may be old enough to remember the phrase Hispanic non-white on official documents where you fill out your ethnicity or whatever word they choose to use, right? Hispanic non-white. That's because sometime in the 1800s, they decided, okay, you're not white. You have to be something else.
I remember that.
And
I do
so
remember seeing
the Hispanics, right, Hispanics to this day are pissed that they don't get to be white. So they invented this term, Latin. And they call their little region Latin America. And that's how they teach it in their schools, right? Asian was a whole different problem because you don't have the skin color thing, but you have a different physiology, and it's all the way on the other side of the world. So what word do you use? So the first words they used were Oriental, they used Mongoloid, et cetera, and now we've settled into the phrase Asian. But the significance really doesn't matter as long as they're not white. And this gets to the real impetus behind everything. When we hear the word racism, it is actually a misunderstanding. All of the things, all of the behaviors, all the laws, all the words, whatever, that we've heard and been taught are so-called racist, they are not racist. There is no such thing as racism. What there is the oftentimes desperate and at times psychotic need to maintain the illusion and delusion of whiteness. That is what is operating.
And therefore, by its proxy, blackness?
Absolutely. Because white cannot exist without some other. The most important other being black, because they were both invented at the same time. It's also very interesting.
To be polar opposites.
You got to have your polarities. You got to have your antithesis, even though they're false. They allow people to say either or. Right? Either or.
Yo,
have something to fight.
Hey, Addison, I think I hear your background.
No,
like somebody's background is drowning out.
It might be mine.
Zoom user.
It might have been mine.
No, it ain't mine.
Okay.
My TV's is
well,
off.
I mean, you're the one talking.
Turned down.
Can you hear? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So
well, you the one talking.
So what we are dealing with psychologically is not a thing that we think we are talking about called race. Race was added sometime in the 1700s to legitimize skin color identity, to make it permanent, to make it deep, right? And so they invented all of these words. European, there really is no such thing as Europe. I mean, that's one of the big myths. You could just as easily call Europe the countries that are the former colonies of Rome. That would be more accurate.
That part.
The word
Europa.
The word Western, particularly the idea of Western civilization, all that is a lie created sometime in the 1800s to justify the mythology of whiteness.
I figured that the Western civilization was made to centralize America at the center of the world.
No, this is the interesting irony of whiteness.
But then again, it's also west of Europa. So, you know.
Well, I mean, they can't.
So like I guess it was centering.
Word.
It was centering everything like basically in Europe, and that was the Western, and then like you had Asia and so on and so forth was Far East.
Was the East.
And so it's like
right.
They were trying to make everything the center of everything,
right.
basically like in Europe and
well,
so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. Even though the history is utterly and completely scattered all over the place, non-related chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly after the fall of Rome. But when you have a need, when you have a deep subconscious existential need to justify something, you can just twist and ignore things. It's not hard. Just like they can make up the mythologies about Africa, right? You had to make that up. It was very necessary. Now, this sort of, what's the right word for it? Paranoid, sort of neurotic behavior was not new to what we are now referring to as Europeans or those countries. They've been doing that for a few centuries, probably more than that, in the quote unquote dark ages, in the medieval period. It was full of, go ahead.
No, I said they've been doing what?
What do you say?
They've been having this sort of neurotic, psychotic, paranoid behavior for centuries. It's not new. It was not new. It wasn't new in the 1700s. It wasn't new in the 1800s. It had been going on in Europe for probably 400 or 500 years.
Now, would that have been like because of the Moors?
No, that didn't have anything to do with the Moors. Although the Moors were on the receiving end of the Catholic Church's paranoid, psychotic behavior. Yes, absolutely. But this is something of a tangent. So, back to the main point. When we talk about racism, and I'll give you a good example. Sometime in the 1930s, when Louis Armstrong was creating a universe with his trumpet, because that's basically what he was doing, he was performing somewhere in Texas. And in the audience was a young college student, a young white college student, who would later on become, I think if not a justice of the Supreme Court, then something close to that. He was watching, and then he recalls the event because of the comment that a local yokel made about Louis Armstrong after he had stopped playing. Now, I want you guys to listen to this comment very carefully. The local yokel turned to the college kid and he said, "He's still a nigger, right?" Now,
he's like, confirm this for me.
With what we know, with what we now know about the origins and the mythology and the delusions of what is referred to as whiteness, we can reach some deductive conclusions and analyses of what he really was saying. He was really saying two things, but one thing more than anything else. What he was saying more
He's still
than
not
anything,
better than me, right?
Even deeper, I'm still white. Right?
I'm still more valuable, aren't I?
The whole mythology of whiteness was shattered, and he did not know how to make sense of it.
He had somebody else to do it for him.
Well, I mean, I guess he thought the college kid looked like he was smarter.
Might have had all his teeth.
So, the superficial reaction to that statement would be, "Oh, he's so racist." But is that really what's going on here? That's not really what's going on here. When we look at the entirety of what is referred to as Jim Crow, because we don't know the history, we don't know our own history, We don't understand that in so many southern cities, particularly in South Carolina, but also elsewhere, freedmen and their children were judges, sheriffs, lawyers, accountants, becoming MDs, etc. There's a quote from a woman, or I'll never forget it. It was a research paper I did my freshman year in school on what was happening in South Carolina in the Combahee River Valley shortly after the Civil War, sometime in the 1880s. And the quote from the woman, I'll never forget this woman, she said, "There are no poor people," quote unquote. Mm-hmm. When you read the quotes of some of the black senators and congressmen who were elected in those years immediately after the Civil War from those states,
The
Reconstruction?
The Reconstruction period?
Post-Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction. Yep. They all state quite clearly that there were no real, as they said then, racial problems, except for a small minority of wealthy former plantation owners who couldn't stand the idea of black people flourishing and everybody getting along. Couldn't stand it. And so they took control of the media, which at that time was just the press, the newspapers. And they started running stories talking about Negro domination. They're going to take your wives. They're going to take your land, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
They need a villain to fear.
Well, they were trying to hold on to the mythologies and the delusions of their whiteness. This is what is going on with all of the events of the last 250 years. You have to understand what the real issue is, what the real problems. Now, I don't even think that's a problem, but it is part of the situation, but it is not the problem. Now, we can see this need to define the terms of the situation continuing just as strongly to this day. If you go to YouTube, every time I see some of these proofs, I always click a quick snapshot. The latest one that I screenshotted, is Black Genetics Explained.
What genetics explained?
Black. And it's a picture. The screen is a picture of Ronnie Coleman, LeBron James, Flex Wheeler, and then I guess because they didn't want it to be all American, they threw in Usain Bolt.
Super Negro.
Let's just think about let's just think about it. Well, here's the thing though. Let's go even deeper. What is really going on here? The creator of the video is undoubtedly white.
Undoubtedly.
He has to maintain control of the situation by explaining us. Understand what is going on.
He's leaning on a time-old tradition of saying, if you could tell black people that they're not good enough, then that means that our light must shine brighter.
No, it's not even that.
Oh, quit making up stuff.
I'm telling you, no, it's simpler, but it's deeper. I'm telling you what you are. That is always the imperative. Joe Biden did exactly the same thing this year. If you don't vote for me,
you're not black. Yeah.
I'm telling you what you are.
Oh shit.
Can't be black.
Nobody, I see like everybody looked past that shit, and I was just like, yo,
I
yo,
don't
what?
even understand. It shows you how brainwashed we are and how accustomed we are to being told by someone else
Who and what we
Who
are.
ain't even
we
black.
are. Do
Who
you
and what we are.
understand?
Hey. I thought I was the only person to
Addison
cop
looks
that.
like he's altogether the North Pole.
People. Other people.
Addison, we can't
What'd you
hear
say,
you,
Addison?
man.
I just said by other people.
Exactly.
By
But
people
it's
who
not
ain't
just
us.
by other people.
We're forever defined by people
we
that aren't us.
always. Now, but we're just dealing with the imperative of whiteness. I think it's important. And again, we didn't discuss this too much in the last discussion. So just to not go over the same material twice,
Right.
I thought it would be good to examine the other side of the situation. Now, the other side of the situation is that we are always being defined and told who and what we are by someone else, particularly by so-called white. It doesn't matter if they're Marxists. It doesn't matter if they are so-called conservatives, whatever. The terms always have to be words created by so-called whites. So what's the term that suddenly appeared in the 60s? Minorities. There's no use of the word minority in American history before the 1960s. Now, you find that word in Europe, and I'm pretty sure that the Marxists who were advising LBJ said, hey, now you can use this word to describe minorities. Well, what does minority mean? It's another way of saying you're not white. What's the other phrase that we hear?
Also, is less
That's the
than?
idea. Yeah, that's the idea. That's the implication. But see, you can't just say things outright. You imply it. The other way it's done is in the phrase women, minorities, LGBT, blah, blah, blah. Women are, again, subconsciously, what they mean when they say women is white. Because why would you say women and minorities when there are so-called minority women? Here's the trick to it. White never identifies itself directly because it is the default. You don't say a hot white woman. You say a hot blonde. You don't use white when you're talking about a man. You say men, and you have a picture of a white man. This is the subconscious way that whiteness perpetuates itself.
To make it the default, to make it the only one.
To continue.
And everything else is other.
Everything else has to be other. Now, the thing that most Black people don't understand is that most white people don't understand any of this and really don't care about it. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. When you get a little bit deeper into it, it will mean something just because it's habits they've learned.
But is it that it doesn't mean anything to them, or that they're okay with living?
They just accept it. They just accept it.
They accept the privilege that comes along with it.
Well, most of them don't feel like there's any privilege.
Or the idea.
And for most of them, it really isn't. I mean, I guess to some degree, a few of them do, like maybe some of the college-educated crowd. Certainly, the immigrants, like the Irish and the Italians, and some of the Eastern Europeans and Poles, etc., who initially had an extremely rough time in America, but eventually were able to sort of just become white, which is what you see happening with a lot of Spanish speakers. They just if their skin is pale enough, then they just elect to be white, right?
So this is why I've heard you refer to them as mainstream.
Right. Now that you're getting further ahead,
Oh,
you're getting into what happens when we shape the language and when we determine who is what and who is not.
Because everything
So
that we've gotten has been given to us.
Listen, man, hold on.
Yeah. Hold on, let him ask questions, Addison. He's catching up.
We about to be 2 minutes down. So let's take 5 quick max, because my dog is about to go crazy for a second. And jump on shit. Give me like 5 minutes.
Again.
That was quick. So where were we?
Waiting on show?
We were, where were we?
You gotta, okay, well, I'll say this. I'll say this, Zoom user.
Okay.
You need to explain that that stands to Brian, because this goes up.
What?
Well, I think you all should pause putting this up publicly. I think if you put it up, it should be private. And you show it to people who you want to start thinking about these things. This information is really not for public consumption. It is not in my interest to start telling white people about their psychological delusions. I have no interest or concern in doing that.
But your interest rather is in what exactly?
My only concern and interest is in Americans who I call brains because of the allegorical meaning of the word bronze, and just because it sounds so fly just to say it. To understand us, you have to understand a great deal of American history and culture. Anybody who thinks they can understand us by any superficial or foreign words is way off base. The conditions that created us have no precedent, it has no parallel, and it's unrepeatable. So those are by definition the conditions for something being a one of one. So because we are something new in every sense of the word, and because we now understand that the language and the terms created in the late 1600s were designed to keep us mentally under someone else's thumb, it's imperative that we come up with words that actually fit the reality.
Is that because words or spells?
Well, you know this, Addison. I mean, words are literally the way you shape reality, quite literally. Spells. And when you're
I see a lot recently that words are spells.
Yeah, and when you're constantly trying to understand yourself through terms and words that were created by someone else with the explicit desire to keep you under their thumb, well, you're never going to know who you are. You're never going to know what you are.
Lupe Fiasco had a intro to one of his albums where he was talking about language being like the one of the greatest diseases or whatever, or something like that. It's the way that you control people is by taking away their language and then making them speak the other language or what have you. It was basically what he was saying. It's not word for word about you, but that's what he was saying. He was like, you know what I'm saying, as soon as you control the language, you know what I'm saying, that's the greatest virus, the greatest disease. It'll push through the entire, you know what I'm saying, culture. And that's a way of controlling it.
Absolutely. And it's even more specific here, though, because we're talking about literally the identifier, the root of your identity. When you say, I am, whatever follows that is going to shape the bulk of your conscious and your subconscious activity. Which is why, and this is very apropos, when we compare the way white boys refer to their fraternal connections from college, they say, I pledged such and so forth. When we see black males talk about it, we hear, I am.
I'm a Kappa.
No.
I'm a noob.
Right, right. Now that can be taken in a couple of ways, but I find the difference in the reference quite interesting. And I think it goes back to the existential void that the words we have always used to describe ourselves create, and thus needing an escape from that void.
So we need something to define ourselves by that has some sort of value. And therefore,
Exactly.
we say, I am that. Since
And then you
saying I am
hit
black is not as
it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. It's basically
And
it's an
it
empty
doesn't mean
statement
anything.
because it's
empty.
imaginary and all that.
Exactly. It is at most superficial. And even worse, it is always connected to white.
That part.
Always connected to whiteness. Always. Has to be.
It's a polar opposite.
Exactly. And it's worse than a polar opposite. It's not an equal opposite. It's a subservient opposite. So we always have to think about our blackness and think about somebody else's whiteness. Does anyone have any idea where the word red bone comes from?
Like the origins of it? Or what it referred to?
Yeah. I mean, I know what it referred
origins. To. Everybody knows what it refers to, but the subconscious origins.
Nah.
The word red bone comes from the Negro's desperate need to imitate and emulate white men. When white men want to signify that a woman is beautiful, they don't call her white. They use an A. She is a blonde. Well, the Negro doesn't have the ability to do that because we don't know how to shape words ourselves. All we know how to do is emulate and follow. So somewhere deep within the subconscious of the Negro, somebody in the South came up with the phrase red bone as a way to put together a sort of semi-proper noun that automatically says a woman is beautiful without needing to add any other words to it.
That part. Okay. I'm
because
with you.
we desperately have to imitate white maleness. When you understand what's going on in the subconscious, then you understand where these words come from. You can't say she is a light skinned, right? That's the value equivalent. Yeah. Doesn't work linguistically. Doesn't work. So when we're dealing with identity monikers, we're dealing with root identity, and then the thing that is always attached to that is value. And Addison, you said it. Something of value, right? That is why we like to say we are a nuke, right? Because it has depth, it has value, it tells you something about a person. It is a reality, right? I mean, when you dig into it, it all makes perfect sense.
It's got its own history, its own tales to be told.
It's a reality.
Yeah.
History, stories, exactly. But because the Negro is only supposed to be able to see our history in America, and I shouldn't even say that, our history, which is America, as not valuable, as negative, as shameful, as something to be avoided or escaped, whatever the case may be, which is behind what's going on with a lot of these cats who ran to Islam. Muhammad Ali being the most prominent. I mean, he was actually, in Ali's childlike honesty. He was very honest. He was like, I don't want a slave owner's name, even though he didn't realize that his mother had named him after an abolitionist. That's the funny part.
Nice.
He liked the way what his name meant in Arabic. Mind you, Muslims have been enslaving anybody and everybody they could for as long as they could. And Africans went right along with it, but that was too much history for Ali at that time. He wanted an escape from it. That's what he wanted. And he, was very sensitive and angry if you didn't call him his name. Who's the guy that he just destroyed just because he wouldn't call him his name?
Kept saying, say my name.
Yeah, it was Ernie. Who was it again? I forget his name. Anyway, so when we're dealing with a negative, the natural impulse is to try to turn it into a positive. But it's impossible to do if the fundamental reference is negative. And it is epitomized in the word nigga. Epitomized. Because we call ourselves a word that is fundamentally a negative insult from someone else that someone else created, but then we get upset
Somebody else does
when someone who doesn't, right, who looks a certain way uses it.
But DMX said, just because I love my niggas, I shed blood for my niggas.
Exactly. But we can't escape the irrationality of that word and the identity attached to it. There's no way around it.
Oh, my niggas.
Either everybody can call you that, or it makes no sense why you would call yourself that. Unless you don't know any better. And that is the language burden we have been laboring under for centuries. Now, let's compare the language burden.
Your phone froze.
I saw a video.
Listen, I can't hear you. You froze.
You need to, man. You need to sit somewhere not frozen.
I saw a video where Delroy Lindo was like on some news. Really?
Now you just came loose. You caught up. Say it again.
You got me now?
Yeah.
I saw this video. with Delroy Lindo. He was on some newscast. And like somebody was on there talking about like, he was like, these two white guys, they was like, yeah, they were saying, this is my N-word, this is my N-word, that. And Delroy Lindo was like, what N-word? Say it. You want to say it so badly, just go ahead and say it. And they was like, oh, we can't say that. And he was like, I dare you to say it.
That's a show.
Go ahead and say it.
That's a show.
That was a show?
Yeah. It's actually really funny.
It was a skit or something?
Yeah, it was an episode. It was an episode, but it's funny as shit. The show is funny. I forgot what it's called. I used to watch it. It kind of puts you in the mind of 30 Rock.
I saw the clip.
Yeah, where you be like, say it. They go to a commercial.
Like, I dare you, go ahead and say it. Go ahead and say it. I dare you, go ahead and say it. And they was like, we can't do that. We can't do that. And he was like, I'm telling you, you can say it.
No. The interesting thing with that word is how it has evolved and how it has been evolved by the record industry. Not by us, by the record industry. They have finally, after about 30 years of effort, have finally succeeded in reaching a state where nigga and bitch are the default words that we use to describe ourselves, male and female. The women who are connected to us call us nigga. That is the state that the record industry and pop culture, but really it's the record industry. That is what has been created. Back in 86, 87, 88, didn't exist. 89, 90, all through the 90s. Started to get better in the record industry, which is controlled by people who are very devoted to their whiteness and to maintaining its illusions and delusions, and therefore to maintaining the comical idea of the Negro by any means necessary, any and all means necessary. They have finally succeeded. It took them a long time, but they're there now. So we're swimming in this sea of irrational consciousness. And we wonder why a Kevin Samuels is necessary.
Who?
We want Kevin Samuels.
Ah.
That's Brian's boy.
We wonder.
That's Show God's man.
We wonder why.
You gotta unmute yourself, Show.
Be your brother too.
Yeah, I fucks with him.
Hey, Kevin is telling the truth. He's telling the truth, but I don't know if he's. I mean, on the one hand, I wish he would get a little deeper into how women have been brainwashed by feminism. But I don't know if maybe that's too off topic. I don't know.
He's mostly on the what you gonna do about it now. That's what he's on. He like, all right, it's done. What you gonna do about it?
No,
they're really not equipped to answer that question. They're not equipped to answer that question. But they act like they are. And that's the frustration.
Yeah, no, you're right.
That's the frustration.
He's right. I don't disagree with him. I just kind of wish he would. But I think he's working wonders. Yeah, I mean,
would do more with it.
I think it's helpful for people to understand that they have been deliberately programmed to think a certain way. I think it's helpful instead of them thinking that this is just the way it is.
When you talk like that, they think you crazy.
I've had a woman tell me that. Well, that's the way it's always been, and that shit made me.
I don't understand that either.
Horrible, just to say it.
That's cognitive dissonance.
Just to hear them say that, like, well, that's the way it's always been.
That's
it's
where
like,
new
for real, that's
information
it?
runs into.
You don't even want to have a discussion.
But that's what happens when new information runs into what you already know, and it counters it directly, and you don't know what to do with it. So you lean back on what you already know. That's cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. But anyway. That's
going to be what we run into with something like this.
Right, well, absolutely it will. And they're just going to prove my points because they'll fall back on what is comfortable and irrational.
You ain't shit, Wash.
I mean, that's the only
guy ain't talking to you. Who are you supposed to be?
That's the only option.
That's anonymous.
Oh, that's Black Dynamite.
Exactly. So when we look at the word, we see that it doesn't fit the reality. When you look at what we have created in the last, 100 years, the deeds, the creations, it doesn't fit. It doesn't work. We create universes. Over and over. I mean, let's just look at Jamaica. Right? Jamaicans have produced, I don't know, maybe two people that are really worth remembering. Who's really sort of made a mark. I'm just being real.
We put each other in boxes.
Who's the first one? Is Bob Marley?
Bob Marley. I mean, I guess. I still don't quite get why.
They had Shabba.
Maybe if he didn't smoke weed.
Shabba.
Like I said, maybe two.
And the black dude from How Stella Got Her Groove Back.
That's Tay Diggs. Tay Diggs is American.
No, he talking about the real dude.
Yeah.
What part of Jamaica you from? By the beach. Get some half-baked in there. Get some half-baked in there.
When you look, I kid you not, when you look at when you watch a video, I was watching this video about so-called elite Jamaican neighborhoods, and they look worse than shit we see in Canal City or South Hills.
Oh damn! Oh
No,
damn!
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Elite neighborhoods with trash on the streets, lawns unkept. Just they're talking about and and had the audacity or the delusional audacity, really is the word, to have a section of some neighborhood called Beverly Hills. Some section called Beverly Hills. The rest of the country is a shithole and is likely to be a shithole for the remainder of its existence. Okay? But because they are not laboring under an irrational thought structure, because they don't refer to themselves as African Jamaicans, because they don't say I am black, they say I am Jamaican, they're able to actually stand on a little bit of something in the face of their reality, which is the exact opposite of what they're trying to stand on. We're in the opposite situation. We literally have created a huge chunk of the 20th century. And the culture that we created about 100 years ago has dominated world culture even more now than 50 or 60 years ago. And we're still using words that someone else created in the late 1700s to keep us under their thumb.
That part. But why?
Damn.
Because
we don't know nothing else, or
because it's a few reasons. Number one, because no one has dug ruthlessly for the truth the way I have, and reached the conclusion that it has to start with facing the fact that the only thing we are is American. And then the creative part, which is probably the most important part, which is coming up with a new word and a new consciousness that shapes the world from our perspective in a way that benefits us. The word is BRONZE. The reason is because when you look at bronze and how it is made, bronze is a fusion of several basic alloys. The two biggest ones are copper and tin. But depending on the use of the bronze, you might add different materials. But the important thing is that the base metals are melted down, they are destroyed, and then reassembled in a way that they are a great deal more than the simple sum of the parts. And when you understand that, then you can begin to understand what we are.
Crafted from something that was put together.
Assembled.
Built.
Over centuries. It is a metallurgical process that required centuries.
Like you said, that could never be reproduced.
Never. And no one has anything to do with us. No one has anything in common with us. If you are an immigrant to America, you're a fucking immigrant, wherever you come from, whether you're Jamaican, Haitian, or fucking from Bangladesh.
Hi.
You don't
Abby's
have
from
anything
Bangladesh.
in common with me.
Shout out to the Bangladeshians.
Shout out to Abby.
Shout out to Bangladesh. You don't have anything to do with me automatically. Now you can get bronze. Bronze can also turn into a verb. Like, what's that chick's name? Rachel Dolezal?
Dozel? Rachel Dozel?
Dozel?
The white chick?
Whatever.
Yeah, Rachel Dozel.
Yeah,
the white chick that was running around acting like she was black.
Yeah.
Right. Now, from the perspective of bronze, what you would call her is bronzed.
But why not blackened?
because black is vanilla and it's superficial, and that's why we're not using that. Basically, what you're saying is that she had become part of the culture of bronze and actually acted within it. But if we're thinking of ourselves only as black, then yeah, we would keep her out of it.
So she kind of had a Negro pass. She gave herself a Negro pass.
Well, that's what you're saying. It's kind of what you're saying. It's like if it's bronze and looked at it from a different perspective, then it becomes something that actually is acceptable because she was doing the work and blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Acting as if she was one thing, while by other identity structures, the ones in place, she would actually still have to be either black or white.
Which is what ultimately she was behaving as, trying to play the victim card, being the head of the NAACP. Like, how do you even presuppose to do that?
Well,
unless you think the victim card is the key to what it means to be black.
And this was something that I had asked Addison about. Who was it? Bubba became president of y'all's fraternity.
Yeah,
that was my thing.
Yeah, Bub.
That was my thing, dude. Like, how do you? So he could do that,
reconcile the one against the other.
But Eminem can't be the best rapper of hip hop. But yeah, I mean,
I'll tell you how. Because to me, a presidential position isn't necessarily the most powerful. The poll mark isn't necessarily the most powerful, but he is an administrator. And I knew that, you know what I'm saying, the guy you're talking about, I knew that Bub was a good administrator. Not necessarily the greatest of our leaders, but he was someone who would be able to handle paperwork in the nines.
But
that's why I did that.
But
and I did it with the idea that those around him would actually support it and then actually do the work, and we'd be able to get stuff done. That's a little different.
But still,
Bubba earned his letters.
A lot of people earn their letters. At the end of the day,
all I'm saying is Bubba earned his letters.
It is what it is, and it's not what it was supposed to be.
As a result, we experienced some difficulties as a result of the way that he handled the things that he handled. But the point is, he earned what he earned.
Let me interject what this particular situation would look like from a bronze perspective.
Go ahead.
He's too fucking corny to ever think he could be a noob. Period.
But see, here's the bag. That's working on a stereotype of what a noob is, and a noob is a lot of things. A noob is basically someone who achieves
here's the bag
field of human endeavor.
But here's the bag on the bag. What is this founded off of? Whose flesh and blood is this supposed to be founded off of? At the end of the day, you have to find that person with them same qualities that reflect what this is supposed to be founded off of.
Right, but see, I would say the same thing to some African.
But you would understand that someone besides y'all, but someone else who actually is a noob would say that it's wrong for me to even discuss it with y'all because you're barbarians.
Of course, I get it. But here's the thing.
That's only because you don't know the secret, even though you may know some secrets.
No, I don't know anything. All I know is that all of the fraternities
they do have a stereotype.
Well, they are bronze archetypes.
There you go.
They are bronze prototypes.
Archetypes and prototypes. I'll go with you.
They are. And if you're not
from such things,
nigga, shut up and let him finish.
Because if you're not of that type, then you don't belong. You don't need. If you don't have the cultural prerequisites
to even want to engage,
you don't need to be exactly like you can't just walk off the fucking street and think you know something about this or that you're able to deal with this or represent it or embody it. I'm sorry, but you can't do it. It's culture, dude. The fraternities and the sororities are emanations of bronze culture.
Mm-hmm.
They are emanations of the culture. They are not separate from the culture. They are supposed to be, I mean, like archetypes.
Yeah. But to me, when the dude goes up to the master and he's like, I want to learn at the feet, and the master tells him no. And the dude says, I'm going to stay here until you let me come through. And I'm going to do that shit. They
I get that too.
They earn their way. And like I say, whatever problems I got with that guy, because I got my issues with him, but I love him to death. And to me, he showed and proved that he did belong. Now, he's made mistakes.
He's a good dude. He's a good dude. And I understand where you're coming from.
But I get the argument. But I'm saying, to me, I will make an exception almost maybe not anymore because of the way things go, but I will make an exception for him.
You would give out Negro passes, basically.
Yeah.
No, let's take that word.
That might be because
I'm not giving those.
I've operated on a different idea of what it is that I am in this world.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Hold on,
I know that I go by
that
they call me these names, but
hold on.
I look at things different.
Let's go deeper. Addison, you're looking at things deeper, and I'm encouraging you to understand that it's a deeper phenomenon than a quote unquote Negro pass. Like, oh, you're black. That's not what it is. When you understand that you're deep, and I'm not saying this to you, Addison, I'm saying it to everybody.
I just know people under my umbrella are under my umbrella. You know what I'm saying? They're under the Addison umbrella. And therefore, since I am my own universe, then it doesn't matter what it is you are. Now, true. Now, no, and I always joke about it, but no dead ass. If the race war comes, I got to go get my man Chris Kessel first. He's got to go. But then after that, you know what I'm saying? I'll figure it out. But I don't tell that too. He's still under my umbrella. That man was in my wedding.
All right, calm down. You don't have to go into detail.
Let me explain a little bit more.
Black people always got some white friends.
Now, here's the thing. These false, and this is going to be the most difficult part for people because we're so accustomed to thinking in false dichotomies. It's like reflex. There is no opposite to bronze. There is no bronze or whatever, or bronze versus, it doesn't exist.
It's not like bronze versus brass. Or bronze
versus like steel. You said, yes. We don't need your elaborations.
It's in and of itself. It is a thing in and of itself.
Yes.
So it is a culture, and this is the thing, and this is like it in a lot of ways is the opposite of what so-called black is, because it is strictly based on heritage, lineage, culture.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we always have to have something that goes against the other? Why must there be an either or?
Because that's the root of our identity. And to a large degree,
all things, though. I mean, it's like in all things. It's like it's got to be good or evil. You know what I'm saying? It has to be the black or the white.
Part of it is the Christian
red or blue
Catholic Church. The other part of it, more recently, is the Marxists who control Hollywood.
Hello.
And most of
they don't give you enough gray.
No, they don't want you to think there is gray. That's why when you go in the Mason Hall, you see the black and white checkered floors. There's no gray checks.
Fellas, we're running on
floors.
We're running on 6 minutes.
6 minutes to go?
Yes.
Come back?
Possibly, though. I think the old lady's about to be here shortly.
Yeah, no. This is enough for today. We can pick it up. There's a lot more to it.
That part, I can see. I mean, I'm right there with you for real on a lot of what you said.
This is why we thought it was so bad that you wasn't here last time, B. I mean, me and Show was all the way in, though. Me and Show was in. This is why it's so great that you're here now. I really wanted TD to be here because I feel like he's somebody who really needs to hear stuff like
that. Part he do.
Well, I also want to hear the type of
it, right?
He will have to it. Yeah, but his live reactions,
right? So let him watch
live reactions are worth hearing live. You dig what I mean?
So let him watch it, and then he can comment later. There's more to it.
Well, he should send in a reaction video.
He could. That would be funny.
I was on the road. I couldn't be there. But yo, I got so many questions.
This is what I think.
It's the culture.
How come? Because
you
know what I'm saying?
understand?
Because TD could pass as white.
No, he couldn't.
I call him a daywalker.
He couldn't.
He couldn't because of the way he carries himself, but he could by look.
Nah, he couldn't.
His skin is pale enough, dude. His skin is nowhere near pale enough.
It's not, man. If you think he could, there's something wrong with you. You
His
want
skin
him
is
to be
nowhere
able
near.
to.
TD's a daywalker. Y'all just not trying to see it.
No, you want him to be a daywalker.
No, I don't want that. I don't want that. I just know that he is. You just trying to y'all just want to get mine.
He is nowhere near pale enough. No.
TD is definitely pale enough. Man.
My cousin Malik is albino. And you can even tell, well, a couple people thought he was a white boy at first, but he looked like a Super Saiyan.
You just killed your argument. You just killed your argument. And also,
well, see, that's the thing, though. And that's the thing. With the new realities, those ideas, and it's going to be really interesting.
They wouldn't really exist then, therefore.
They don't really exist. Yeah, they don't.
What albino?
Because basically what you're taking away, you see, you know what it sounds like to me, though, and I'll say this.
That doesn't even exist.
I'll say this, because this is one of those things that kind of be on my mind. It's like the competition that we're always feeling like we're in. It changes if we change our identity structure, then therefore we're not looking like you can be only one or the other anymore. Then it changes the actual whole process of dealing with the entire world, if you think about it.
But
I'm saying it's no longer I gotta compete this against this.
You can't really
choose this or
this. You can't change
all things are actually options.
You can't change that when brothers is losing the nod. We don't even nod, man. You don't know. This is
people don't even nod
crazy out here.
And so it's like it's wild when you think about it that way. And so it's people stop nodding because they feel like they got it, that you might take what they got so that they can't get what they need to get. And so everybody's got to fight for everything.
Yeah, it changes everything.
If it's no longer either or and all these options are therefore available, then I mean,
well, it's not only just not either
or. The
world
actually opens up.
It's that you actually value you. You value you. And you value what allegedly is like you.
Then you don't even have, therefore you don't even have to compare.
Exactly.
And when you don't have to compare, then that's why they say that we forgot the secrets and we have to compete against each other all the time.
Then you always feel like you're a king.
That part.
And if you're a king, you'll rule a kingdom as opposed to serving it.
And when you really get deeper into it, then you start pushing each other, iron sharpening iron. When you really get into it,
that's the part that's hard. I've tried that. This iron around here sucks.
Well,
no, but you know what I'm saying.
But
you're my iron, just like me and Show. You know, just like me and Zoom user, all of us, we're the iron. We sharpening each other. Just in this conversation, it's happened.
Yeah.
We've all become better.
No, the reason you're not able to do that around here is because cats around here are still underneath the thumb of the language, of the verbiage.
That part. Okay.
Their whole consciousness, they don't know anything else. They don't even think there is anything else. And that's why language and words are so critical. Because you literally shape a person's reality, their consciousness, with the words. So they don't know any better. So until that black box is broken open, they're not going to understand how iron sharpens iron. They're going to think you just, they're going to think you either just hating on them or getting on their nerves, or because they're still stuck.
They won't accept being iron.
No, they still have to change on the brain. They're still laboring under the idea that slavery only happened in America, and that they are something that they're supposed to somehow think they lost out on something. Like that is the deep subconscious and conscious narratives that we always labor under. The reality is the opposite. We always talk about the soldiers who've lost their lives for our freedom. Well, guess what? Those men and women who sacrificed their freedom to build America from scratch deserve every bit as much praise and gratitude as any fucking soldier who ever died for this